Hello and welcome to the Product Opscast. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm Graham Reed. I'm your solo host for today, and all will become clear in one moment. In this episode, I'm sitting down with two of the creators of the Makers Manifesto, both of which you will recognise. First, my regular co-host, Antonia, Landi, who has taken up a new role today on the other side of the table. And also returning guest, Faith Forster, who we spoke to earlier in the year, in fact, only a few episodes ago, where the Makers Manifesto was introduced. And we were so desperate to get her back onto a dedicated session on this project that she kicked off originally. So really, really great to have you both on here today. Welcome.
Thank you.
For the benefit of our listeners, do please just tell us a little bit about yourself. Antonia, start with you. Everybody knows who you are unless you're a brand new listener.
Oh, this is so weird to do on my own podcast. How much fun. My name is Antonia. I'm a product ops coach and consultant. Based in Berlin. If you've been thinking, reading, talking, watching anything about product ops, it's likely you've seen my face before, simply because I do not shut up about this great, great discipline. And I am delighted to be here as a guest today alongside Faith.
I kind of feel like you should have had a different background. You should have sat on the other side of your
I
desk.
should have, yeah.
And Faith, over to you.
Yeah, sure. I feel like I've introduced myself before, but I'm a product leader. I've been doing B2B SaaS or fintech for about 15 years now, from starting my own all the way through to I led the business part for Wise globally for a little while. Most recently, I think the one I spoke about a little bit more was at Dext. We had sort of 14 product teams. We sold our software about 18 months ago. Yeah, and then since then, I've been doing playing around a lot with AI, talking to a lot of leaders about AI, at a number of conferences, and really bringing this manifesto to life. So yeah, lovely to be back again and sharing a little bit more about the manifesto and hopefully providing a super useful tool for all teams in the way they think about this whole transition.
Fantastic. Well, let's kick straight off. Faith, do you want to give us a little introduction to the Makers Manifesto before we start diving into a few more questions? And for those listeners today, this session is going to be a little bit more kind of a more traditional type of interview, talking about the manifesto, why it's important, and some of the key elements of it as well. So Faith, kick us off and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the inspiration for the Makers Manifesto is very much the Agile Manifesto, which many of you will be familiar with. So that was published 25 years ago, actually, in 2001, by a 17 American men who went to a ski resort in Utah because they were frustrated with the way that software was being built at the time. So it very much represented that transition from how we thought about and built software for boxes that were sold on shelves to building software for an internet age where it was accessed sort of readily. There was an opportunity to, make releases far more often than every 2 years. And so we needed to think a little bit more around sort of being close to the customer and understanding kind of how it's used and built in a way that's a bit more responsive. And so those principles and values still have relevance today. However, the world has changed again quite significantly with AI. We've certainly in the last 6-12 months, we've been in a situation where, the rule book's been ripped up. Everything's being questioned again. All the things that we've learned from the last 10 plus years around the great ways to build software, those assumptions are being questioned again. And actually, that's really hard. When nothing's certain anymore, you're sort of, the basis of operating is shifting sand. It's really stressful. It's really hard on everyone. Leaders, operators, it makes it really difficult to make good decisions about how to go about building great products. And so the Makers Manifesto was really an attempt to, there was lots of stories starting to come out about, some of them more true than others, around how different people's opinions or different organizations' experience of experimenting and trying different things, which is kind of helpful, but actually not really a reference point that we can use as a basis to make sort of solid decisions with some level of confidence. And so the Makers Manifesto was really an attempt to bring together a number of leaders in a similar way that they did to create the Agile Manifesto, to think about what changes, what stays the same, what are the most important considerations in this environment to help us think about how we create great products in an AI age. And so that's really what it's a response to, is giving people a reference point or a new set of foundations that they can then make those choices for themselves within their own teams and organizations.
Well, I think the first most important question is, did you all go off to a ski resort in Utah?
I mean, you know what?
Wouldn't
When
that
I
be
heard
nice?
that story, I was like, why didn't I think of that? No. Well, there's a very good reason why we didn't. The group that created the Agile Manifesto were a set of American men. And so this is very different in the sense that not only is it well represented by women, but it's a global group. So we've quite consciously, purposely got people involved from different geographic regions, different disciplines. So the Agile Manifesto was also all made by engineers. And so we purposely wanted a representative voice from different geographies, different regions. And as it happened, it turned out to be quite gender diverse as well, which I'm really proud of. That was an unintentional benefit.
Fantastic. Let's dive into the manifesto a little bit more and kind of some of the context behind it. Was there a need for a new manifesto in our profession?
This is so interesting, right? Because I think when I first got reached out to and kind of roped into it, I was already pretty convinced that that was a yes. And I think coming off the back of co-creating the Product Ops Manifesto in 2023, I think. So it's been a few years now. They readily recognized that need, right? Because I think even back there, the reason I wanted something like that to exist is because it did feel new. It did feel like we needed an artifact that, like you said, Faith, we could reference back to, we could use to inform how we build our organizations. So when I got that very first email, to me, it was like, yeah, absolutely, this is necessary. This is the right time to do it, even though we might not have all the answers, although I think whoever can say that will have all the answers. But yeah, it was a resounding yes, because I think we're all collectively feeling it still, even, right? Even with more experiences being shared, more companies being more open about how they approach building with AI and the ways in which it's not working out. There is no foundation. And I think that's on a personal level as well what I was missing. Like we're all figuring things out as we go. And there's magic in that too. But being able to come back to a grounding set of values was valuable.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, and I think it's in the preamble as well, but that's exactly what we were trying to create, is something that could ground, that acted as a way of grounding people to say, like, this is the most important things to think about. It gives like that foundation, that basis of then saying, well, what does this mean? What do we therefore do? How do we think about how we operate? And it's really difficult to do that when you've got no grounding around how we work today.
I think the name that you've chosen for this manifesto is super important as well. And whether it was clearly by design, but whether actually was fully taken into account the shift that we've now seen in the product world, in the software world, is super interesting. But why did you call it the Makers Manifesto at the time? Why not Builders? Why not Agile 2? Or in fact, there is an Agile 2, but Agile 3, or whatever you wanted. What was it about that name that stuck so well?
Yeah, we had a lot of debate about this. So we had a WhatsApp group, which most of the contributors are in, not quite all of them. But as I'm sure you can imagine, this group are highly opinionated, very vocal. There's been a lot of very interesting debates in that group, which we've purposely encouraged. We actually think that, and actually we talked to it in one of the principles around complex problems deserve disagreement, that we created something better as a result of the disagreement we had within the group. But there was a lot of talk about builders, because look, it sort of makes sense in this that we're creating things. But the word builders is very easily associated with the development process within creating software. It's often considered quite limited in the phase of the product lifecycle that it refers to. And what we wanted was something that talks more holistically. And the word makers, when it was put out there there was like a sort of unusual silence, which I was like, oh, there might be something in this. And then I sort of quietly, had a few conversations with a few people, and they were like, yeah, this is nice. We like this one. Like this makes a lot of sense because it talks to that creation process, the craft in a way, but it's very inclusive in that. And we've actually defined the term makers in the preamble as anyone whose decisions impact on the customer experience. So it's all the way through from a founder to an engineer to a marketer to a product person. It is everyone who is involved, customer support, customer success. And so I think that's really important because you need all those considerations to make something that's a really great product for a customer. It's not just the code or any other particular point in that process. And so I think this is a way of giving a reference to the outcome or the impact that we're trying to have through the whole process. So the craft is not about the craft itself. It's about what we can do for our customers.
I absolutely love it.
And I think what was really important for us as the wider group as well is that this is not a product management manifesto, right? Yes. This is also not an engineering manifesto, design manifesto. It is really a cross-functional endeavor designed to have all of us on the same page, because I think in the future, that's what will become more and more relevant. So the term maker, to me, encompasses that more wholly than I think any other option we laid on the table. Because, like you say, builder has certain connotations, right? But I think maker is broader, but there's still an outcome. Like you still produce, you still make something. And I think I'm very happy with the name that we chose collectively, because it really does speak to this boundaryless making that's rapidly approaching us, I think.
And I think that's super relevant in this context because roles are blurring. And certainly a few months ago, there was a real question around, do we even need these roles anymore? Or is it one person can do everything? And that we'll learn more, that will evolve, our understanding that will evolve over time. But actually, irrespective of what roles end up looking like, the lines are definitely blurring. People can do more, they can cross boundaries. They should have a better understanding of how they cross boundaries and what the considerations are in that context, irrespective of whether or not they're actually doing the work. And so Makers kind of talks to that.
I think that's so important. I think when you throw AI into the teams now as well as another part of the making process, I think that with this renewed drive, I think that I've certainly seen in the last 18 months towards being more outcome focused. We had a big wave of that many years ago, and it kind of spurred off. And now all of a sudden we're kind of much more focused on outcomes once again. I think it absolutely speaks to that. And I think it speaks as well to having the whole business involved in the process as well, taking responsibility for their parts in the process as well. Gone are the days of, we've chucked it over the fence, it's now product's problem to deal with. No. We're all in this together. And actually, so in this case, we are all part of that process. We are all makers. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. Let's dive in a little bit more detail to this. I know there's a number of key values as part of the manifesto. Do you want to take us through some of these and just walk us through what these mean and how makers that will be watching this can identify with this?
Yeah, there's 4 values. We actually, in the development process, we actually started with the principles and then sort of wanted to create some values that sort of overarched that to help people remember, because there are a lot of principles. So they loosely align to the why, the what, or what is success, the how and the who throughout the sort of cycle. But that was actually something we realized in retrospect rather than when we were creating it. So the first just talks about purpose over possibility. So there's a lot of stories and reference points people have got today of, we can create anything. So let's just create it, throw it at the wall and see what happens. And that's not helpful. Actually, that creates, yes, you can do it quickly, but that creates burden on the product, on the customers, on the team, the go-to-market team being able to understand it and sell it. There's a lot of challenge around that. And so just because we can doesn't mean we should. So that's really what this is yes, there's lots of possibility. There's so much more we can do. And that's amazing. Like, we've got this super powerful technology and we should be using it to do greater good, that's what we talk about, be more ambitious. Like, yes, go for it. But filter it within why you exist. What's your purpose? What's your product about? How are you serving your customers in a way that's really valuable and unique and interesting? And that should be the filter that we use to consider all of those options and really stay focused on driving that throughout that.
Well, we've got value realized over effort spent, right? And I think this one is very interesting because, again, and I think this is something that has been prevalent in product and software development for a very long time. We spend effort, therefore we believe it's something good that we're bringing out into the world, right? Traditionally, hey, this took us a year to develop. It must be amazing. Let's launch it, right? But again, returning back to what is important for us. And I think, Graham, it's interesting that you mentioned earlier we're returning to looking at being more outcome driven. I would actually argue that right now, at least to me, it still feels like we're in this space where AI lets us do things, so we just do them, right? Harking back to the first value. So this idea that we return to what is most important, and that is value creation. And it is not the effort we spend to get there, I think is another grounding value that we had to look at.
It's an interesting one because, and you alluded to that absolutely right, that AI, and vibe coding, etc., absolutely does allow us to just build shit and throw it at the wall and see what sticks for sure. But in that particular piece, when effort is now so low, in terms of effort spending, your piece out, we've built something that is, took us a year, so it must be great. And we must release it. With all the effort we put out, we must get it out the door. Now, when these things are so little effort, at least in human effort, how does that then balance with the value that it then creates? And actually, should it just go out the door because it's so low effort?
Yeah, this value is really a reaction to what we've seen, and thankfully this is changing now anyway, because the CFOs have sort of broken up to it. But there were too many examples of tech businesses creating leaderboards of how many tokens were being used, and that being like literally and explicitly used as a basis of performance. And that's not what this is about, right? This is like, I can kind of understand we need to encourage people to try the technology and see what's possible with it. But that's not creating value for customers. And that focus is not the right thing to be focused on. So like one of the principles we talk about here is measure what drives value. That's always been something we should be doing, absolutely. But it talks about without distraction, because that output orientated measure is such a distraction from whether or not we're actually creating customer value. And so I think this is really around how do we, when everything is being sped up and amplified for humans, but also mainly via the agents, how do you make sure that, we've always had challenges around staying aligned to strategy. So you then speed that up by 100 times, it becomes amplified in a really unhelpful way. So this is really around like, how do we create an environment where you have confidence that everyone is driving towards the strategic direction, the business goals we're trying to achieve, what we know our customers need. How do you make sure that you've got the discipline, that those guardrails are in place, that you are focused on driving value in everything that you and your agents and your team and your humans are doing? So the next value is around learning loops over launch plans. This is, as I said, it talks more to the how. There are a lot of things we could have put in here, and it is, you can't talk about every piece of the product life cycle. So we really wanted to pull out the things that are different in today's world. And this, interestingly, in the workshops that we run around the manifesto, the first response we've had is like, oh yeah, we do this already, this value, we've got it under hand. And I was like, no, you don't. Let me explain why. Because there are some really fundamental shifts that come true in some of these principles. So we've always, in product orgs, we've always either intentionally or not referred to the definition of done as something being shipped. It's gone into production. That's what we've sort of been driving towards. And actually, in an environment where you can ship every few minutes if you want to. That doesn't matter anymore. What matters is whether or not customers are getting value out of it. And so that the metrics that you're then monitoring to work out whether or not it's no longer around, yes, tick, it's been pushed into production. It's, did the customers use it and get value for it? So success measures now really should be around adoption. It's around have customers use it. And so the opportunity here is to orientate the whole process around adoption. So the build doesn't finish until customers have adopted it and gotten value out of it. That's a very different way of working between the team members and the process and everything that goes around that in your operating model. If it's all driving towards adoption instead of shipping. So that, like the brick wall that it has historically existed between the product org versus the go-to-market org, we should be trying to break that down. But that sort of plays out in a number of these different principles. It's like, how do we make sure that we understand the people that we're serving and their needs and make sure that's an inherent part of the process? What evidence do we gather? How do we do that in a way that's sort of AI oriented, but still keeps the authenticity of what we've historically done to understand those human needs? And how do we make sure that we understand the shifting landscape that we now have that's rapidly shifting in far quicker? I was talking to someone a few days ago who runs has been running an AI native business for a few years. And she said every 6 months, major features that they've built, they retire because they're no longer relevant or they're not built on the best technology anymore. Or the need has changed because Claude can now do X, Y, and Z. And so, in an environment where we used to have 12-month roadmaps, it's probably going to be rebuilt twice over in that time. It's like you can't assume the same level of stability, I guess, within your context, your competitive environment, as well as the technology and what it's capable of and what your product effort needs to do. And so there is so much learning that needs to go into feeding the thinking behind that to work out how you build in this environment, how you create that great experience.
I think this is really an interesting one, and I actually got a question on the kind of the process that you and the rest of the team went through on this one. I would imagine that as you have been kind of creating the manifesto, you've been lots of ideas from the 44 odd people I think that were involved in it, I believe it was, and all different experiences, etc. This one in particular, I was listening to what you were saying, and absolutely completely makes sense. But I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, do you know what? For me and where I've been and the business I've been in, launch plans have not been as big a thing compared to kind of having really good repetitive feedback loops in place. But that's my own experience, and that's the businesses that I've certainly worked in. So I'm really curious to hear about, for that one in particular, what was the collective experience that was brought to the table?
Well, I think that's so interesting because that's exactly the reaction I think we've gotten from so many people. It's like, no, but this is obvious. We've all been doing this for eons. And I think a considerable number of the contributors are or have been coaches, maybe consultants at one point or another. I think a lot of us have seen many different organizations, and the amount of us that just went, no, you haven't. No, you don't. There is a much, much higher ceiling to this than you can imagine. And I think this is also exactly why we sometimes get these tensions when we talk about the manifesto and the values specifically, because I think the values, they're kind of common sense. Like, to a certain extent, you as a, senior product leader, you might read those and go, yeah, absolutely. But I think that's where the principles really come in. We make it really explicit about what this particular value means in this new context, in this new world we find ourselves, and the ambition to realize we should do better and we can do better, even if we're already very good at it.
I certainly knew that was going to be the answer to this. It was a very tongue-in-cheek comment, because I think one of the things for people listening here is you will look at these and you will do exactly the same. Go like, yeah, but that's obvious, isn't it? What value am I going to get from this manifesto because it's just saying things I already know? Okay, you may not, and I think you have to maybe ask yourself some very honest questions. Actually look quite deeply below the surface of how you and your teams are actually operating. But at the same time, there are many other organizations out there that are not working exactly the same as you are as well. And I think that's really important context here to surface. I'm obviously conscious of the time that we've already spent talking about this. Let's certainly move on to the last value before we move on.
Last and certainly not least, it's human accountability over full automation. And we had so many conversations about this, so many conversations about the wording, the order of the principles within that value specifically, because it's foundational, right? It's something that should underpin absolutely every single effort in this space. Ultimately, we are still humans building products that solve human problems, even if there is an intermediary that, oh no, we're just agent to agent, right? We just build products for other agents, right? But at the end of the day, there is a human with a job to be done somewhere. And I think we need to be responsible enough to understand that there are humans who are at the building step, at the making step, and how we interact with one another. And there are humans at the receiving step at the end of all of these fancy products and services that we are building and making in the process. So really going back to what risks are we taking? Not only financial and business risks, but also human risks, possibly ethical risks. How do we work with one another? And what goodness are we at risk of automating away? And I think that's one of those principles we'll dive a little deeper on, I think, in a minute.
Well, we're recording this mid-August, and within the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've had two of the major AI organizations, the LLM owners, come out and say some quite interesting things that their products have got away with or gone out to the world and done. So I think, and as well, a very recent episode, we also spoke to Simonetta talking about ethical and more use of AI in this context, which many of us are very passionate about. So I think that's so very timely and so good to see that actually we are thinking here about the near term and fundamentally long term future of where we are right now, not just pushing this manifesto to say something, very utopian, as many other organizations and people have tried to do in the past, but actually ground this in what's right to be done, not just possible. So I think I applaud everything that's been done here.
Simon is one of the contributors. So she was very passionately encouraging that we take an opinion or a position on ethics. And it is, we were quite nervous about it, to be honest. I particularly was nervous about it. But, some of the people in the group quite rightly brought up that there are products that others may not consider very ethical, and who are we to say whether or not that's right or not? Actually, the response to this particular value and a couple of principles underneath it, 13 consequences matter and humans sign the work, 16, it specifically have had a really positive reaction. People really loved that that's been written down, that they've seen that it's important, and that's come from so many different people representing different products, different countries, etc. That's been quite a broad reaction, actually. So I think that has touched a nerve. Yeah,
fantastic. Let's move on, because there are a number of kind of key principles that the group, you all have kind of created as a part of these and linked to these values. And we've picked out a kind of two or three to talk about today, and that actually, in the context of kind of the operational world that certainly Antonia and I live and work in, that you've picked out to talk about. So do you want to talk to us about some of those?
Sure. So I think that the first one that I desperately wanted to highlight here, it's not new to our world. I'm pretty sure I've spoken about this before on this very podcast, but it's make context explicit, right? And I think for us in operations, this is the foundational piece. This is ultimately what we have to ensure. Because if you are starting to have agentic and human teams of makers and builders, the agents need to understand just as well as your humans what the business is about, where the boundaries are, what's important, what's explicitly not important, and what level of risk is appropriate where, right? And something that was so interesting is that I think we went back and forth on this, Faith, a lot. I think so we had an in-person workshop with some of us contributors in London. And at the end of that day, this principle actually was not part of the list.
No, it wasn't.
And I think you and I, at some point in a later call, were like, I really feel like this needs to be in there because it really is that foundational. And yeah.
Yeah, it's been the one that's come out of the workshops we've done around the manifesto. This one has consistently come up as step one in terms of how we need to think about differently around enabling AI native ways of working for teams. And the wording around this, we went back and forth with, and the word ambiguity came up. And at one point there was a draft saying that humans can navigate ambiguity, agents can't. And we took it out because not all humans are particularly good at navigating ambiguity, but agents definitely can't. And so I think this is not a new problem in the sense that we've not been particularly good at setting strategic direction historically, even for humans. Like often it was a strategy that was announced once a year on an all hands, the deck was probably shared and then hidden in email or wherever somewhere. And no one really referenced it. If you ask questions, no one really could talk to it. We weren't really sure what the targets or the goals were. Like it wasn't embedded in a way that enabled day-to-day decision making. And this is now required because we are making major decisions day to day, both humans and agents. And those decisions can take us off very, very quickly in every which way direction you can possibly imagine. And so this is the starting point of setting those guardrails around this is what matters to us. This is what we need to be focused on. This is where we drive value. It comes from this context being really, really explicit.
I think it's fantastic, and I'm really, really glad that you, Antonia, you thought to get this included. Both of you thought to get this included. I mean, I'd argue, and the experience from a product ops perspective, I get its context a lot quicker than humans do. If we're talking about the strategy of the business, if we're talking about, how to work, how to operate, very much in our world, Antonia, about kind of like, what are the standards and the principles that we are going to work out within our teams and what are the ways of working? I picked it up 99% of the time, first time. Humans have to go through so many different versions and reminders of all of this. And absolutely, there are questions, on the flip side of that. AI is very bad at kind of challenging, at least right now, whereas humans are fantastic at challenging, which is absolutely what we want. But, balancing those in the middle somewhere absolutely shows that there is a need for humans and AI and everything in between to make sure that they have very clear standards, guidelines, set of instructions on what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, what's our direction of travel, and how do we get there.
Yeah.
Love it.
Absolutely. I think the second one we'd like to bring to this conversation specifically is one that I think will have implications for product ops as a discipline. And we've seen bits and pieces of this, in teams that are maybe a little bit more forward thinking. But I think, again, this will become a much bigger part of our experience, and that's make for adoption. And again, it sounds basic, if you will, but this idea that it's not done until it's in the hands of users and they have confirmed that it actually, serves the purpose they came to it for. This is something that will become much more relevant as we double down on AI ways of working, let's say, in the future. For product operations, this gives us such a fantastic opportunity to make that bridge to commercial teams so much more explicit, right? I think even in the past, when I led full-time product ops roles, that link was like a nice to have. It's like, okay, like figure out the mess in product first. And then maybe if you have time, go speak to a commercial lead, see what they actually need from us, see how we can improve that relationship. But that is now as much part of the development lifecycle as is filing that first ticket or wherever we might be doing in the near future, right? So this idea that this relationship is now no longer nice to have, we'll get to it if/when we have time. this is now one of the most important partners in how you get your product to market, how you actually achieve success. And thinking about product ops roles specifically, we will need to make it more explicit, like I said, but also to make this a two-way street, right? I think in product, and by extension a little bit in product ops, we tend to be a little more on the side of, well, if you need something from me, you come to me, right? But this understanding that this has to be a conversation. This is not something where it's enough for us to just push information out and then whoever is in the commercial team can figure out how to make that useful for them, right? This will become table stakes, I think. And I think this making for adoption, not making for release, not making because it's on the roadmap, making for adoption is what we'll have to center our efforts around much more explicitly.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, particularly that last statement. I think if you make that the central goal, then the way you even think about the way the teams are organized could be quite different. Like customer success becomes part of the product team, sales, or depending on the nature of the organization, there's been quite a number of organizations. It's been really hard to actually talk to customers. There are people or processes that become gatekeepers to even being able to access a customer. And so if that customer adoption is at the heart of that process, then how can you do that without customers? And so the whole way of thinking about the way we build products, what it means to build products, what success means, I think is fundamentally different if adoption is at the heart of it.
There's an interesting kind of full circle piece here, because we was talking earlier about making sure that the whole business is part of the build process, the makers, the all makers, where everybody's involved in this. And there's a piece that you've said there, Antonia, as well, which is, product and is kind of very often kind of, hey, we'll build it and then we'll hand it across and you go and figure it out, sort of thing, And ironically, that's always the thing that's irked product teams when commercial teams have kind of done the same. It's like, hey, we've got an idea. It's now your problem to go and deal with. Well, we have frequently been, we've gone and built your idea, but now it's your problem to go and put it out the door. And actually, this now brings everybody back to that central table again in saying, we are all involved in the strategy. We are all involved in the kind of go-to-market, the adoption part of this as well. And that includes product teams, that also includes the commercial teams as well. I just love that is bringing everybody back to that central table again by decentralizing who is owning any aspect of this. I think that's just fantastic. Well done with this.
Adoption is what making now means. And some examples of that, I think I might have talked about on the last podcast. I've sat and watched customers using it and then made some changes, asked them to refresh their browser, and that it's different, right? Or I've sat and watched gathered evidence from a number of different users and then gone and completely redesigned the whole feature. Like when it's so easy to build, it's a matter of days, if that, to completely redesign a whole feature now. Then why wouldn't you then make that something that's the restriction is no longer the build time. The difficult part is getting customers to actually use it and get value out of it. And so that becomes the center and idea is like, how do you do the build work? Like, what's the opportunity to build with your customers, not just for? And that's a really fundamentally different way of thinking. If you really think that through in terms of our whole customer research process, the customer success side of things, like it is a fundamentally different thing to put an engineer with a customer success person on a customer's site and work out what their process is, how they do their work. How do we make this product more flexible so that it doesn't kind of roughly almost solve their needs? It's actually flexible enough that it is inherently personalized to every customer in the way they're using it. There's so much more flexibility we can build into the product now. The things that were sort of de-scoped because they were kind of a niche use case. Like there's no reason why we shouldn't be solving those things exceptionally well now. It is a very different bar to be working towards.
Does this mean that more people around the business need to have a broader scope of what they're thinking about? Does it mean that they have to be thinking, at least internally, of other parts of the business. Let's use a very stereotypical example. Engineers now need to be thinking and in terms a little bit more about what that adoption process is going to look like, and the impact on those commercial teams and those go-to-market teams, more than very traditionally we've had before, because actually more people are around the table. There are more important things than just shipping the code and getting it done and moving on to the next piece.
Yeah, definitely. Without a doubt. And that's why it's the Maker's Manifesto. So we think this is relevant for all roles, and it's actually the basis of understanding that all roles need to operate from, because how else do you work well together?
I've absolutely loved this interview and getting to hear a lot more about the manifesto from the both of you, two very key proponents of this. What's next? What's next, and how can people learn about the manifesto, and how can they start using it and adopting it?
Yeah, there's at this point we're really trying to spread the word. We're trying to make sure more people know about it, they understand it, they know what it means. They have that basis of understanding that they can then apply to the way that they operate, the way they work, the way their teams are working. And so please help us spread the word about the manifesto. You can download it both for humans and for agents and share it with your teams. You can add it to your agents. We have people actively A/B testing the impact this has on the quality of the output from the agents by having the manifesto as one of the skills and files that the agents are using. But the early feedback from that is that it's had a positive experience very quickly. We wrote this knowing that the world was rapidly changing, and it was risky in the sense that we don't have all the answers. We certainly didn't when we started this process. We still don't now. And so we developed it knowing that it will probably change at some point. And so we are gathering feedback. There's a few ways you can do that. There's a Maker's Manifesto profile on LinkedIn that you can tag in, and I or others will see that feedback. You can comment on the website itself. You can also send comments directly via the Contact Us form. We've been running a number of workshops. We'll schedule some more for after the summer, so you can join in some of those workshops there as well. We've been gathering feedback that way too. But really what this comes down to is, and the reason we created it, is to help businesses create great products and do that easier, better in this rapidly changing environment. And so really the important part, and this is where I think product ops in particular plays a really valuable role, is helping work out, how do we apply this within your organization? What does this mean? What do we do differently? How do we help your team members make better decisions day to day because they've got this understanding, this grounding? And so that's where I think it's really interesting. There's potentially more we can do to help with that. We've had some requests from additional resources. We'd love to hear more from people about what would help them, particularly product ops people, because this is your kind of bread and butter. How do we make this exceptionally easy to implement and valuable to your organization?
Yeah, I think for everybody listening or watching to this, read the manifesto. And especially if you're in product ops, I'd really invite you to think about what would have to change in your organization based on the principles and values of the manifesto. And I'd be keenly interested to see how realistic you believe that might be. Because I think with every kind of advent of broad change, there is utopia, and the organizations we all want to work with, work in. And then there is reality. And a lot of the time, that's the organizations we work with today. And that delta can sometimes feel like a chasm, right? That is insurmountable. And it's interesting, right? We often speak in product ops, especially about pragmatism versus dogmatism. And a manifesto can rapidly become dogma. But I think what every single contributor is interested in is helping us all collectively take the next step. So please read it, reach out, say, this is a million miles away, absolutely no way we could do this. Or come to us and say, hey, actually, we're already much further than you thought we might be, because that's also super valuable input.
I would add one piece to that as well, and I think this speaks to both of you and many of the people that I know quite well already that were part of the creation of this, which is you're all people that are aware that Firstly, you don't know it all. You don't know it all yet. You never will know it all. And that's exactly what you're going for here. One of the things that we have absolutely seen with the Agile Manifesto over the 20 odd years ago, or whenever it was when it was created, is, like you say, it's become dogma, and people have so rigorously defined it, particularly in the early to mid 2010s, of saying this is absolutely the way it's got to be. We've got the good book Agile, and actually you need to now change your entire business based on what's in this book. That's absolutely not what being said here. Is you're going to approach this in a way that it is generic enough to apply to kind of different businesses and different situations. Businesses haven't got to change to that. Actually, it can be adapted to business. Part one, part two, that you're saying here, we're going to learn, and it's going to improve, and it's going to change. It's actually going to change. It's not going to be exactly the same manifesto that it was 20 years ago. It's going to change. It's going to improve based on the figure, based on the changing world that we are in as well. And that, I think, is what makes this so appealing in my book, to absolutely look at this, adopt it, to join those workshops, to follow the progress that you are going to make over kind of the next year, 2 years, 3 years on this, because that is genuinely how businesses will adopt it, because it will adopt in line with that changing world and what everybody finds out. That's going to be the key behind this, in my humble opinion. Fantastic. What I'm also looking forward to as well is, if I think we said that we want to do this again in about 6 months' time, maybe towards the end of the year, maybe early in 2027, to see what has happened, what's the updates, what changes have been made to the manifesto, what have you learned, and actually what has adoption been like in all of that time. So I would absolutely love to invite both of you back. Antonia, you're going to be here next week anyway. But both of you back to talk about this again, and let's see what the world looks like.
What would be amazing is if we could have one of your listeners bring a case study and we could talk to the case study. Yeah, that would be really cool. So
there we go.
That's all your listeners is use this and tell us about it.
There we go then. Any listeners that have listened to this and over kind of towards the end of 2026, early 2027, that do adopt it well, see some real value from this, please get in touch with any of us and be a guest on that podcast at that time and show us how you made it successful. Fantastic. Thank you once again for joining us on this podcast. I do believe actually you are the first returning guest onto one of our podcasts.
That's right.
Which is a milestone in itself. Thank you so much for joining and for sharing, and for everything that you have done personally to put this manifesto together, bring everybody together, and just keep talking about it and keep getting it out the door.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor. I've loved it. I loved our first conversation. I love this one. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Antonia, while you're still on that side of the table, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, you will be on the other side of the table when we have our next episode of the Product Opscast. Thank you to all of our audience. Do please make sure that you're connecting with any of us, and in particular, do please feedback anything that you have seen, heard, or tried to adopt with the manifesto. All of the details have been shown on screen throughout this episode. And to our regular listeners, we'll be back for more unusual episode next time. Thank you and take care.